Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of our Q&A panels brought to you by the Harm Reduction Task Force. Today, we have three very special guests here going to talk on harm reduction and permanent supportive housing. My name is Carrie Leonard. I'm the Director of Learning, and I will be your fabulous moderator. So let's get into introductions. Let's start with you, Gilberto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gilbert Carrillo. I'm a case manager at Huntington Park, project-based housing site.
Megan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Megan Cronin. I am the program director for our West Side Housing Department, and I oversee our scattered site and jail programs, otherwise known as ODR.
Hey everyone, my name is Mikaela and I'm a clinical case manager located at the Ness in downtown LA, and I work with the permanent housing department.
Excellent. All right, so let's get into our first question. I believe, Mikaela, this one's for you. How is the harm reduction model applied to working with clients in permanent supportive housing, and why is it a helpful model?
Yeah, such a great and broad question, and I'm excited to see what other people have to share with this too. But just to start with, like, harm reduction in general, it's pretty simple concept of it's a way that we seek to reduce harm for our clients in an empowering and non-judgmental space. And so in permanent housing, this model really looks at every individual and meets them exactly where they're at and sees that permanent housing is a basic right for everybody, regardless what they're carrying with them and what behaviors they're bringing into the picture. So it's something that I've seen that benefits the most when it maximizes the most amount of choice for each individual and their self-determination. So it's very collaborative. It's non-coercive, and it basically just seeks out treatment services and housing that gives people options on how to best practice their life choices, whether it's through substances, sex practices, finances, their relationships with their landlords, with us, and seeks to make that a collaborative process and reduce as much harm as possible. So more focusing on permanent housing and their relationships, this model helps our clients create a more predictable environment. So it focuses on their behavior when enforcing a lease, or it gives them different options of doing certain behaviors off the property to avoid different kind of conflict that may arise. And it allows them to be a really active member of a solution team when they're trying to brainstorm different ways to participate in activities that feel safer and that feel more collaborative with us. And the reason why it's so helpful is because it establishes consistency and trust with their care team. So if a client is using a certain substance and maybe they're not utilizing the most safe practices, the more that they share that with us and the more that we consistently show up for them in that way and remind them of safe practices and show them that this is not a judgmental space, that they have the right to use certain substances or engage in certain activities, but we want to see them be able to be safe and thrive at the same time. It really creates an interesting and I think really beautiful rapport that we get to have with our clients. And so I think that's why it's so beneficial, is it just bridges the gap between the clients and housing providers and maybe past traumas and issues that they've had. And again, just going back to how it's so helpful is it just builds this really authentic care that we get to show our clients. So an example in permanent housing would be I have a client who gets very, very triggered by her landlord's presence. It triggers a lot of things from her past and reminds her a lot of people that hurt her in the past. So a lot of her trauma responses don't create a safe space for herself, for the landlord, and it creates a lot of tension. So it puts her permanent housing kind of at risk when there's that barrier there. So an example of harm reduction is then having me there to be a supportive system so that she can still engage with her landlord when she has to. But now there's a way that reduces the harm, that she can still do that and practice her coping mechanisms in a way that feels safe and feels supported at the same time. So we're able to establish safety plans to avoid those triggers, even though they may happen, she still has support. So yeah, that's where I see it a lot in permanent housing is just reducing that harm and letting them have as much autonomy as possible.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to add anything else before I move to the next question?
I think one of the oh, sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I think something like super important that I think Mikaela explained well is that it's an empowering choice and creating practical solutions that aren't like our own agenda driven. And sometimes that's hard because oftentimes makes our jobs harder, but the impact, in order to make it sustainable, it has to come from the client, and really this like unconditional positive regard, regardless of the choice that they make, but really empowering them to believe that they have the ability to change what parts of their life they want to, and then also really meeting them where they're at and treating, this from a public health lens and knowing what resources are and are not available or practical to our folks. So I just wanted to highlight that. That was well said.
Yeah, no, I mean, on my end, I just wanted to add, harm reduction to me is a philosophy of addressing a client's behavioral issue, which in turn is causing them harm. And it could be in terms of their housing, their physical health, relationships. So just being able to help that client through a lens of client-informed trauma care. It's just, helping them understand that by reducing these behaviors, they're going to increase their housing retention, they're going to focus on their health and nurture better relationships. So definitely that's why it's helpful to me, in my opinion.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, so I'll move on to the next question, which is, again, you, Mikaela, but then we'll get to others, don't worry. So how do you apply harm reduction to mental health symptoms and substance use in housing?
Yeah, I love this. I love this lens. I think it's really important. And the beautiful thing about harm reduction is it really acknowledges mental illness and substance use as an active part of people's lives and not necessarily a problem to be fixed, but something that really just impacts the way that they make decisions, impacts their scheduling, impacts the things that makes them feel good, that doesn't make them feel good, that it's important to them. And so I think that's really, really crucial. Also, that harm reduction recognizes mental health and substance use as health issues and not like criminal justice issues, I think is a really key thing to keep in mind. So it looks like some ways of treating mental health and other substances are just safer than other methods. So where we see that in like the concept of recovery, we see that as a way that process and that journey is so unique and looks so different for every individual, that sticking someone in rehab against their will because we think it's best for them is not the way to be helpful. And it's also not a way to partner with people. So a way we kind of apply harm reduction with something like substance use is providing education around Narcan, for example, for opioids, or providing Narcan for them if they know people who are using or they are using, to have that on them, to educate on safe use, where to use. Are you using with other people that you trust? Are you getting substances from people that you trust, from a consistent source? And I think a big part of harm reduction with substance use is assessing kind of the pros and cons of what that substance does. I know a lot of people use substances to minimize physical pain that they have because it's really hard to get to doctor's appointments, and that's something that helps. And that's really important to them at that moment. And also seeing the cons. Are the cons kind of getting in the way of your goals? And that's where we kind of see a lot of motivational interviewing. It's just assessing like, this may be a thing that, you're using or you're choosing to do at this moment. And let's just say you have a goal to do this. Do you see those conflicting, or are they going well together? And kind of opening that conversation for them. So just assessing the relationship with your goals. I know there's been a lot of trainings about like discussing like needle exchange services or like safe injection facilities. So it's a part of doing the work of making sure that those resources and education purposes are in their hands, because it's only so good if it's in ours, and that we just kind of hold it, but we have to pass it on to them as well, so that they feel empowered to make a decision very clearly. And I heard a really great example when we were kind of touching base before, I think like a week ago. I think Naomi shared this of like a great example would be like if a landlord is saying no smoking on property, but your client is like smoking marijuana to like de-stress, or it helps with their mental health symptoms, or XYZ. And like discussing different options of using, whether it's offsite or using edibles. So it's really just exploring with them different possibilities to engage in substance use safely, and in a way that just aligns with where they want to be. And yeah, and I think with mental health symptoms, a really important thing that I found works with a lot of my clients is establishing like coping strategy lists. Mental health symptoms spark at all different kinds of moments within all kinds of triggers. And a lot of the times it's just referring back of like, okay, what did we decide helps? Okay, let's try that again. Let's see if it helps. And just continuing collaborating as those things arise. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. And I can really appreciate the lens in which you're coming from, looking at it as not a problem to be fixed, but acknowledging that this is a part of folks' lives, right? So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Did anyone else have anything to add before we move on? Well, all right, then we'll get to the next question. Okay, the next question for Gilbert. How do you apply harm reduction to relationships in housing? Great question.
So I have a couple of different examples, but I'll start with, for example, when I've applied harm reduction to tenants and the client's neighbors and their surroundings. So basically there's this client that I have constantly engages with people that he shouldn't be engaging. And basically I've had conversations with him regarding these relationships, you know, trying to use my motivational interviewing skills to try to see what's his motivation behind hanging out with these people. And one time, one thing that stuck with me that he really told me was, you know, bad company is better than no company. And when he told me that, I'm like, okay, so your motivation is that you're really trying to build relationships with people. And what I started doing was, you know, looking for resources to senior centers and stuff like that, so that he can make more meaningful and better, more meaningful relationships in which it won't impact his housing and his physical health and all other aspects of his life. So that's one example where I've applied harm reduction to negative relationships. Another one is with that, you know, most people will in this position as case manager will relate to is applying harm reduction to with the landlord. A lot of our clients, you know, when you have somebody implementing rules and they don't want to follow the rules, that creates all kinds of chaos and trouble. And you know, sometimes me, in order to make sure that the client stays housed and, you know, doesn't run the risk of getting evicted and whatnot for not complying with rules or recertification, sometimes I have to play the middleman and, you know, be like, well, as the landlord, for the recertification paperwork completed with the client, just make sure that they're being compliant in every way they can, but without communicating with the landlord, just because those relationships sometimes, you know, I feel like a lot of our clients feel like sometimes property managers will retaliate and stuff like that. So, you know, one way at which I apply harm reduction is in a relationship between client and landlord is like, you know, really just being the middleman, because there's not much else I could do. And lastly, the third example that I have is like, it's a relationship. So I have this client and I've applied harm reduction in his relationship in relation to his medical providers. So basically he struggles to go to the doctor. So I was like, you know what, I was able to get his PCP to write a referral for in-home health. So we were good. He started receiving treatment. He started receiving nurses twice a week. He started to get a little bit more care, which in turn, that's the goal of our program, you know, Housing for Health. But then even I had to apply harm reduction even further when complaints were made by the home health agency that, you know, client was harassing female nurses. So then I had to take harm reduction a step further and request male nurses. And then, you know, so that's one way in which harm reduction is applied to a relationship with medical providers in my experience. Just making sure, you know, it's just not, there's not one layer to it, there's many layers to it. And, you know, it's like I said, it's just about making sure that any behavioral issue client has, you're addressing it so that it causes him the least amount of harm possible. So those were my 3 examples of how I apply harm reduction to relationships.
Thank you for that. So I know of sometimes things I've come across has been working with clients who, in terms of relationship and mental health symptoms and substance, is a sort of a combination of when folks get into housing and they want to have all their friends over and they want to use with them, right? And so then you got the landlords and there's heavy traffic. I know this isn't a predetermined question, sorry to throw this out, but I know that this is something that happens quite often. So I'm wondering if any of you have encountered this, and maybe what are some strategies that you've used in this situation?
I can briefly speak into that. I have 2 clients who have experienced really similar situations, and with one of them, it was actually, thankfully, a pretty easy solution of just meeting at someone else's house, which worked very simply. They were very open and it worked. And sometimes it's not that easy, but the other one, we're actually still kind of brainstorming. The current solution right now was to only have one friend over at a time, because the conflict at hand was the amount of traffic happening all at once. And so I think like the main takeaway from those kinds of interactions is giving them choice of like, you can still make these decisions, like you can. I just want you to know that like, these are some of the repercussions that can happen with those, or we can look at something else and try and like problem solve. And so giving them as much like choice there as possible is like what I found to be like the most successful, is because then it's less like me telling them, you need to do this or you're going to get evicted. Even though we don't want that, it's fully in their rights to keep doing it if they want to. So it's also like just making sure they're so aware of like, there are other options we can explore, but if not, like these are kind of this is what we're looking at. So
I agree. I think something that when we look at housing folks, especially with like the LA housing market and it truly being a crisis that we're responding to, oftentimes when we house people in permanent housing, we are not housing them where their previous like nuclear was, where they were staying, where they were sleeping, where they were eating, where their friends were. And more often than not, they might be their only person from that group who gets housed. And so there's a lot of pressure of feeling like you are now responsible for housing everybody else, or maybe you're experiencing any, negative relationships because now you're housed and you're trying to do the best you can. Maybe you're working on reducing your use or whatever it is. And our tenants, our new tenants, feeling really powerless against that these are friends or family or people who otherwise are going back to the street that they have to turn away. And so it's really something to talk about ahead of time with them, talking about what happens when you do this. And I was in a project-based site a couple of years ago, and it was like, just have your folks leave in like off hours, like not at 3 a.m. Can you have them leave at 6 a.m.? So like people are already starting to wake up. So then it's kind of the natural flow of traffic going in and out of the building, and it's less noticeable. And then also, like because saying, just realistic expectations of what will happen. And then it's ultimately up to them. But we have even put, if friends are able to be IHSS providers, which is the in-home healthcare provider for their friend who was recently housed, utilizing that. And then also just being cognizant of sometimes we have to go above and beyond and support folks who are not exactly our clients, but who touch our clients in a really significant way and put their permanent housing at risk. And so then we do try and offer them resources and support so that, it's also aligning with the client and what they want. And then something really to consider also is the domestic violence factor here, when and knowing the rights of folks who are experiencing domestic violence in their home and the rights they have in terms of not getting them connected to the legal aid, and also rights from being evicted if they are truly in danger. And creating, again, it always goes back with harm reduction, practical solutions that come from the client that they can easily access themselves, truly without all our support. Because when they're housed, we're even in a project-based housing site, there are many, many hours that our clients are left independent to make some hard choices that they're not always prepared to do so.
Thank you so much. What I really love from those takeaways for our viewers that harm reduction doesn't have to be this complicated thing, right? There's very simple, practical interventions that you can use, whether it's, having them go to a friend's house, having someone over one at a time, having them leave during regular hours, right? So reducing the risk of them losing their housing. So, harm reduction can be applied really quite simply, not always, but yeah, it can be. We don't have to overthink it always. Gilbert, did you have something to add? I saw that you were off mute.
No, that was it.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll move on to the next question. And this is for Meagan. How do you apply harm reduction to health and permanent supportive housing?
Yeah, so when we think about health, we've touched on mental health, and there's physical health, substance abuse, and also sex practices. And they all play into this harm reduction model. And I think one of the first things, if I'm thinking as myself, the first day walking into our agency, and the nature of the referral is often their eligibility criteria is because there is some sort of physical, mental health, substance abuse, sex practice that made them eligible for housing. But that can be super intimidating because quite literally really big systems had to have failed our clients in order to make them eligible for our services, including housing. And, it's not like just our folks have one client on their caseload. There's multiple clients on their caseload, and looking at on paper, 100% super intimidating. Where do we even start? How do I even begin to do this? Another thing that I know comes up a lot is if we don't have a personal experience that aligns with the client. So maybe we don't have a substance abuse past, or maybe we've never been homeless before, and our clients engage in testing behavior in the beginning of those relationships, which we truly believe they're right to be testing. It's a healthy thing to question a relationship after all the trauma that they've experienced. We often feel like, we don't have a leg to stand on because, we don't have this similar experience, or maybe they say, how would you know, or whatever it is. And I really go back to the importance of it's a matter of joining our clients in sometimes a powerless situation, but harm reduction actually equalizes both ourselves and the client's power to then make practical steps to changes in their life. And when talking about these things, mental health, substance abuse, sex practices, it's okay to be uncomfortable. And we don't have to try and pretend that we are the savant on, sex work, or that we know everything about this street name of this drug and the street name of that drug. It's really powerful to be humbling and tell your client, honestly, I'm really uncomfortable right now because I just really value this relationship and I don't, have a personal experience like you just asked me about. But what I can tell you is that I'm incredibly invested in this relationship. And part of my job is to get to know you specifically as a person rather than like another cookie cutter part of the system. And really just acknowledging that and being able to model what health seeking behavior looks like from the very beginning. It's so empowering to have our clients teach us about drugs, teach us about their sex work, teach us about their history going to this clinic on a Thursday, or whatever their past has been in terms of getting their health met. And then also really importantly, what does health look like to them? And I think one of the biggest challenges that I continue to struggle with in my work is that we don't get to prescribe quality of life to our clients. And so it's really, really hard as a provider to go into a unit and watch our clients make decisions that we wouldn't make for ourselves or for someone that we loved or someone who we spent this much time with. Oftentimes we represent everything to the client. We're their Uber driver, their ex-lover who messed them up, we're their mother who left them, their friend who just stole all their money and things like that. And again, really just grounding yourself and letting the client, let it come from the client. What does health look like? What does harm reduction look like for them? Because if we try and prescribe it, I think Mikaela touched on this, we're never it's not long lasting. It won't really stick. And then it really doesn't matter if we have somebody in 6 days or 6 years, going back to Gilbert, if we've not invested in this emotionally corrective experience, then the client won't be calling us when it's time to make these hard choices about, preserving permanent housing despite probably a propensity for substance abuse or whatever it is. And really just acknowledging that while you're not the subject matter expert, you're not afraid to talk about scary or hard things. And that, yeah, it's going to be hard and frustrating, but you're willing to sit with them in the frustration and continue to try whatever they think will work. And then really never using services as leverage for engaging in support. And another thing about harm reduction when it comes to health, and so we think about that quality of life piece, that there is a line. Harm reduction isn't just everything goes. When it comes to clients' immediate safety, we do intervene, and oftentimes it is a line of quality of health that we do have to step in. And so I think part of harm reduction is just being trauma informed and transparent throughout the relationship, letting them know that these are your concerns, letting them know exactly what it looks like when you as a mandated reporter are going to have to step in, and how that might feel. It might feel like a betrayal of trust because I told you that I will, our work is confidential and I'm here to support you. But there is a line in being really honest with them about that when it comes to, their substance abuse, when it comes to maybe a client's hospice in home, yet they're guzzling all of their pain pills. And it's like, well, are they actively speeding up death, or are they actually just treating their end of their life? And again, being able to have honest conversations and just knowing as someone who's new to the relationship, no matter where you are in permanent supportive housing or who you touch, that like, there's a reason we're on a team, because our clients are just so complex, and there's never going to be a time where we have like the Bible set and everybody just runs out with it. And really being open to client feedback, I think in harm reduction is super important, and health. When your client is maybe not wanting to go to the primary care and they say yes, and then every time you show up at the unit, they're mysteriously not there, even though you called them 5 minutes earlier and they said, yeah, I'm gung ho. And then just being honest, be like, hey, I feel like every time that we say we're going to do this, it like doesn't feel like it's happening. And I always say the answer to this question doesn't matter. I just need to know where I stand so I can better help you. And so really taking, again, this non-judgmental approach and really one of honesty and partnering. And that goes back to, the piece about collaborating and empowering choice rather than imposing some sort of system or set belief.
Thank you so much, Megan. Oh my gosh, there was so much wisdom in everything you just shared. So I think a lot of people are watching are going to be really grateful for that. I love the point about really just, the clients are the experts on their own life, right? And keeping that in mind. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, anything else to add before we do the next question for Gilbert? Anything else? I know, it's like drop mic on that one. Okay, Gilbert, so as field-based service providers, how do you and your staff practice harm reduction during transportation and home visits? Great question.
So, as field-based service providers, sometimes we have to transport clients, or sometimes we have to meet clients in their homes. And, sometimes some of our clients are not the cleanest of clients, and it's okay. Like I said, you always have to look at it through a lens of trauma-informed care, understanding where they're coming from. But, sometimes you got to take steps to protect yourself as a provider. So, when I'm transporting clients, I try to put the windows down, make sure, I disinfect the car after I've transported clients, just for my safety. And you never know, I might be transporting 2 clients that day. So me disinfecting and taking precautions could save the next client that might get into my car later that same day. During home visits, I try to, we had a case recently where they were doing bed bug inspections, and one of our clients tested positive for bed bugs. And ironically, the week before, my coworker was going to give that client, had offered transportation services to that client, and the client had declined. But had that client decided to go onto that, my coworker's car, there could have been an instance where there could have been a spread of bed bugs, pretty much. So one way of protecting yourself is, just out of respect, when you go into their homes, just try standing. That's one thing I do. Another way that I practice harm reduction when I do home visits is like, if I know I'm going to visit a client that, I know traditionally gets irritable at me, or it could get into a situation where I have to kind of leave, I always make sure that I have a clear path to the exit. So that's, just for my safety, for the client's safety, I just make sure that I don't put myself in a situation where I can't exit if I don't feel safe at any given point. So those are just little things that, me as a service provider practice to, to my safety and the safety of our clients.
I think something just to add to that point, but going back to like harm reduction is not like an anything goes model. And especially when it comes to transportation, I know that like there's a pressure. It's like, well, if I don't transport them today, then they're not going to go to the housing authority. Then they might lose their voucher, or they might do this or this, that, and the other. And so there's a ton of pressure coming from all sides all the time in this work. But again, being able to say that when they're engaging in kind of challenging behavior, even like in the car, really setting a boundary and saying like, hey, Mr. Jonesy, whatever, like today doesn't feel like it's a great day for us to get this done. And I want you to know that this is actually not how we speak to each other, because this is a professional and collaborative relationship. And so when you're ready, I'm ready. But today it doesn't seem like we're ready, and I'm actually going to make that call. And I think sometimes clients might try and walk it back, but they're really super escalated. And I think that's an important part of crisis de-escalations, especially in the car and going into their homes and saying like, it sounds like there's a lot going on. I'm going to leave, and then not going back and forth for 20 minutes and still not leaving. Like when you say you're going to leave, and say, but I'm here, you have my phone number. And when you're ready to engage in the relationship, like I know that you're capable of, then I'm here. And then really, truly, it's hard challenging yourself in that next interaction to provide an emotionally corrective experience rather than come in there harboring a bunch of anger or annoyance. But we're humans having human reactions to really challenging human behavior. And so then maybe at that point, it's consulting your supervisor and just being honest, like, I'm still hot and heavy over this, and I need better guidance on how the heck I'm going to go in there and provide quality services. And knowing sometimes you just have to tap out and take a break, and that's okay too.
Thanks for that, Megan. I just thought of a story to share myself about transportation. I was working with a client who drank a lot of alcohol, and we had an appointment at Social Security in the morning, very important to try to get his benefits reinstated. And he usually was pretty drunk by this hour, and I knew that I was driving him. And we had the kind of relationship to where, we're very honest with each other and we could talk about things. So the harm reduction strategy I used for this particular transportation scenario was asking him the day before if he could wait to drink until after the appointment when we got home in the afternoon. And because we had an appointment, I was hopeful that we weren't going to be there like for 4 hours. But just, asking him if he thinks that he could just wait until I dropped him off to drink. And he did it, and we got to the appointment. So, yeah. Well, that is all the questions I have, but I really just want to kind of go around and see if anybody has any final thoughts, any words of wisdom, or any way to wrap this up for our folks watching today.
Yeah, I have a thought. I think something that just like hearing both of you talk about your experience with harm reduction that just keeps coming to mind as a theme is that this whole like harm reduction concept and like the complexities of working with people who have undergone trauma and are carrying all their survival techniques into a permanent housing model, which may not be totally appropriate in this new lifestyle, and that's really hard, is like really carrying this concept of empowerment and collaboration and like education at the same time of like, here are all of your options. And Megan, I really like how you like continue to reiterate that this isn't like everything goes. This is the fact that you have choices that you can make. And I want to be a part of picking up those pieces or part of the new transitions, and for you to be as prepared as possible. And so I just think it's a really, really cool opportunity, even if it feels uncomfortable, because not all of us are coming from backgrounds that have experienced substances, experienced homelessness, experienced different sex practices. Like a lot of that can be brand new. So again, like just speaking back to like what Megan already said about how it's so important to be honest about that. That like, I'm not scared to talk about it and I'm not scared to hear about it, but I may not know anything really about it. And that's an okay space for us to be. But if you'll have me in that space, I want to be here. And I think that's like a really cool message we get to communicate with our clients.
Thanks for that, Mikaela. That was a good wrap up. Does anybody else have anything to say? I don't know. I think that's a kind of a good way to end things. What do you all think? Awesome. So thank you so much for sharing your time, your knowledge, your wisdom, your support. This concludes another Harm Reduction Task Force panel Q&A, and catch y'all next time. Bye.